Good evening, everyone. As you are able, I invite you to rise for the entrance of the Honorable Joan Marie Aylward, Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, and His Honor, the Honorable Carl Thompson, and please remain standing for the Royal Salute. Thank you. Please be seated. Well, welcome to all of you who braved our windswept land for this evening, and welcome as well to those who decided to join us online. Not a bad decision, probably. We're happy to have you wherever you are. My name is Lisa Brown. I'm Vice President, Advancement and External Relations with Memorial University. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. Memorial University's campuses are situated on the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous lands, and with respect, we acknowledge the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. It is such a privilege to welcome you here this evening at this gathering. It's a moment really that marks the beginning of a week devoted to reflection, remembrance, and purpose. I'm particularly pleased to welcome our new president, Dr. Janet Morrison, here this evening as she takes the helm as the 16th president of our university. The chancellor's also here, but he's been around for a while, so. To help set the tone for tonight's event, I invite you to watch a short video that speaks to the heart of Memorial's founding purpose, a living memorial.
The past does indeed echo down through the present. It was, I think, a great gesture of hope in 1925 to found an institution that was to educate people. And I think that is a great gesture of hope for the future.
This university will live as a symbol of enlightenment that cannot die. I saw it today as a beam from a lighthouse of learning, nourishing the development spiritually, intellectually, and economically of Newfoundland, now and for generations to come.
It would be extremely difficult to overestimate the contribution that Memorial has made to every aspect of life in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Let us not fall into the trap of taking for granted a memorial that is now so big and so pervasive. Hold it in your mind. Cherish it. It has made us what we are. It will continue to be the dynamo that drives our society.
Memorial University seems to be determined to transform culture, to correct historical omissions, to genuinely engage in reconciliation, to welcome diversity, to make its home here, and in all ways make a real difference.
It's more than bricks and mortar and teachers and students. It's a place where we can learn, where we can grow, where we can develop, and more importantly, where we can safely dream about the future of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Memorial University is not just an institution, we are a living legacy, and what an impact it has had for 100 years. We exist because of sacrifice, and we thrive because of purpose. Our students, faculty, staff, retirees, and alumni honor the fallen by striving for excellence, by building a better future for Newfoundland and Labrador, for Canada, and for the world. It is in this spirit that we are honored to welcome Dr. Sarah Lockyer to our province. Sarah, your presence here means so much to us. Dr. Sarah Lockyer is a nationally respected forensic anthropologist whose work has brought dignity and closure to the families of Canada's fallen soldiers. Many of you will know of her leadership in the repatriation of the Unknown Newfoundland Soldier in 2024. She also played a key role in identifying Private John Lambert of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment more than a century after his death. Tonight, Dr. Lockyer will present on the Casualty Identification Program. Following her presentation, she will join a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Linda Ingpen, Honorary Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st Battalion Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Joining them will be Shirlene Murphy, great-niece of Private John Lambert, and Major retired Michael Priddy, founder of the Trail of the Caribou Research Group. We'll also have time for questions and conversation. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Sarah Lockyer.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the very warm welcome, and thank you very much for Memorial University for making this happen today. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. So I'm going to be talking to you about the Casualty Identification Program that's within the Directorate of History and Heritage at the Department of National Defense, and how we are able to identify the newly discovered skeletal human remains of missing Canadian soldiers from the First World War, the Second World War, and the conflict in Korea. I'm going to start with sort of a general overview of the program, so you can see a variety of different steps, and then I'll go into the case study of Private John Lambert so that you can see how it all came together and we were able to identify him once he was newly discovered. So once the slides are up, perfect. So the Casualty Identification Program exists because there's over 27,000 Canadian service members who are missing and have no known grave following the First World War, the Second World War, and the conflict in Korea. That means that we don't know where they are. Now, we do believe that the vast majority of them are already properly buried underneath a Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone like the one you see in the photograph. But if you look at the headstone in the background, right here, for that headstone, it simply states a soldier of the Great War. We don't know his nationality. And if we take Tynecott Cemetery as an example, it's one of Commonwealth War Graves Commission's largest First World War cemeteries linked to Passchendaele. It has 12,000 graves in that cemetery, and 8,300 of those graves are a soldier of the Great War. We don't know his nationality. So because of that, excuse me, it's impossible to know how many Canadians are already properly buried. We do two types of investigations. We call one the identification of remains cases, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about this evening. Currently trying to identify 42 skeletons that have been discovered overseas. All are linked to the First World War. Another type of investigation we do is called the identification of graves cases. This is a purely historical and archival research process where sometimes you'll have individuals who are going through the cemeteries and they'll find a headstone like the one in the photograph, and it might have a rank, a date of death, or a regiment associated to that. And using the historical documentation, we might be able to figure out who occupies that grave. It's important to remember, however, that once a body has been buried underneath a Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone, they cannot be exhumed for any reason whatsoever. So that identification of graves process is purely historical and archival. We cannot do DNA on those who have already been buried. Since 2007, we've been able to successfully identify 36 skeletons, and we've been able to change 12 headstones to one from unknown to one with a name on it. The historical research is a huge part of the identification of human remains. It gives us an idea of who went through the area, who died, and who went missing when we take a look at the exact location where the human remains were found. So as an example here, on the map, this is an example of what my military colleagues will do, and they're going to use a Google Earth image using the GPS location of where the human remains were discovered. In this case, it's this purple square that's right here. They'll put that on the Google Earth image, but then they'll superimpose the trench maps on top. The French and the Belgians were really, really good at rebuilding everything exactly the way it was. So roads are in the same place, railways are in the same place. And using that, we can then start to have a better understanding of what the Canadian boundary looked like, the blue line, the red line, and then the green line, which were military objectives, which then gives us an idea of who we could potentially be dealing with in terms of identifying that individual. The document here is a copy of an attestation papers for the Canadian Expeditionary Force. We have two types of information that are absolutely important out of that document that everybody had to sign to enlist with the Canadian Expeditionary Force. That's date of birth and height. However, many lied about their age. So that date of birth on that document is wrong. So it means more historical research to find a birth certificate or a baptism record to confirm the date of birth. And when we actually look into attestation papers for the Newfoundland Regiment, because they were not part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, many of them don't include a date of birth. It's simply age upon enlistment. So you'll see something like 19 years, 3 months. That's not really helpful. We need to know the actual date of birth. So a lot of extra time goes into finding out exactly when these soldiers were born. So as a forensic anthropologist, one of my main responsibilities is to do the anthropological analysis of the human remains. The first question I have to ask myself is, are the things in front of me on my table, is it human? Many times you'll get individuals who think that they're being helpful, and they've stumbled on some human remains, typically due to farming or construction activity. They'll pick everything up, and then they'll call the authorities. But in doing so, they quite frequently will pick up animal bones, pieces of wood, rocks, or worse, leave human remains behind. So it is very important to make sure that I am able to sort everything out that's on my table to make sure that everything is there is in fact human remains and not other things. The next question I have to ask myself is, what is the minimum number of individuals? Do I have one person or do I have more than one person? The easiest way to figure that out is to look at duplicate bones. Do I have two of the same bone? As an example, everybody has two legs. So we have a left femur and a right femur, which are your thigh bones. If I have two right femurs on my table, I've got 2 individuals on my table. That's another thing that's important to double check, because again, we've had experiences in the past where a construction worker stumbled on some human remains, picked everything up, called the police 3 weeks later. By then, the entire area had been paved over as part of their construction process, and we couldn't go back to see if we can find anything else. And when he gave everything that he had found to the police, he was absolutely adamant that there was only 1 individual because they did not have enough bones to be more than 1 person. There were in fact 3 people that had been discovered. Unfortunately, I was only able to identify 1 of those individuals. The other 2 had to be buried as unknown soldier because all of the information had been lost. So it's very, very important, and my colleagues at Commonwealth War Graves Commission are doing very good work in communicating with the construction companies and with farmers that if you find something, call Commonwealth War Graves Commission and they'll come right away to recover the remains. So the main things I have to look for on the skeleton are things like age, sex, height, and if there's any damage to the bone or anything like that to help us identify that individual. Now this is a rough kind of representation of all the different steps that we can take in an investigation. We don't take all of them, but they are available to us if we need them. The casualty identification program is very much a reactive program. We kick into gear when something's been discovered. We do not actively search and recover. Usually that comes from a Commonwealth War Graves Commission discovery of remains report that gives us this set of human remains or multiple sets of human remains were found on this date in these circumstances. Then the history starts to figure out who went through that area, who died, and who went missing. Then I have to do the anthropological analysis of the human remains. Now, the human remains are not repatriated to Canada. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery to where they fell, which means I have to travel to where they are stored and do my analysis on site, usually overseas. We can also use something that's called forensic odontology, which is called forensic dentistry. And the Canadian Armed Forces have the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team. So within the Royal Canadian Dental Corps, there's a group of about 12 dentists who are specifically trained in forensics to be ready to help with disaster victim identification. Disaster victim identification happens when you have a mass fatality incident, so a lot of death, really unexpectedly, really fast. Examples would be a forest fire, or an earthquake, or a plane crash, something along those lines. Now, because those types of events don't happen all the time, thankfully, they do help us with the casualty identification program in the hopes of being able to identify some of the remains that we're trying to work on. The problem, however, is that somebody after the First World War decided that the dental records of the dead were no longer important, and those records were burned. So we don't actually have the dental records of the dead in their personnel file. So I can't use the forensic dentists, who do fantastic work, for about 99% of the casework. Stable isotope analysis is a chemical process that can sometimes help us figure out place of birth. Now, we're looking at a very big geographical area, so sometimes it's a difference between born in the UK or born in Canada. And another tool is DNA. Now, I'm sure almost everybody here has heard about DNA before, and it's all very exciting, but I can tell you right now, it doesn't happen like you see on TV. There's no big flashing green sign on a computer screen that says 100% match. It takes time. And sometimes you get some really, really weird results that actually create more questions than provide answers. I'll go into the complications that we encounter with DNA in the case study so you can see some of the kinds of questions that sometimes they can bring up. The final step in the process is called the Casualty Identification Review Board. So when I feel that a case is ready to be presented to the review board with a recommendation for identification, I will complete a 20 to 35-page identification report that summarizes all the information. I include the historical report that was created by my colleagues, and then I will present it to the review board and say, it is recommended that these human remains be buried as Soldier X. The quickest turnaround that I have seen from date of discovery to date of identification is 6 months, which is incredibly, incredibly fast. The longest that I've seen is actually our most recent successful identification, Lieutenant Hemsley, who was buried in Loose British Cemetery in April of this year. Took 11.5 years to identify his human remains. So every case, while being very similar, is also very different. So I'm going to go into the case study, and you can kind of see how all of this is going to come together to get, hopefully, a positive outcome when we're done with the investigative process. So the discovery itself happened on April 2016 in Belgium, and it was actually part of a planned archaeological dig. So in many places in Belgium and France now, they're starting to do that, so that they know that it was an area that was heavily fought over, so they have planned archaeological digs to recover any of the human remains. And in this case, 4 skeletons were found, and they were mixed together. And where they were found is this red star up here in the area. But Canada was only notified of the discovery in September 2016, so almost a year and a half later. The reason being is that there was something that was found with the human remains that insinuated that one of the individuals out of the 4 was from the Newfoundland Regiment. And there was some confusion in the early discovery phase as to who is responsible for Newfoundland soldiers, because in the First World War, of course, Newfoundland was not yet part of Canada. So in September 2017, I actually got a phone call from my British counterparts, and they said, hey, we are getting ready for a burial to happen in April 2018. One of the 4 that we're burying, and we're all burying them as unknown soldiers, is from Newfoundland. So does Canada want to be part of the ceremony? And I was like, wait, what? You want to bury a Newfoundlander without an investigative process first? But he's Canadian. You can't do that. And well, no. And then they went into, of course, the argument that because Newfoundland was a part of the UK at the time, it was their responsibility. So I explained that when Newfoundland joined Confederation, that also affected the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and that the Canadian Armed Forces is now responsible for all past, present, and future. That means we're going to stop the burial, and Canada is going into do a full investigative process to see if we can identify that Newfoundlander. So what we're dealing with is the Battle of Langemark. It happened in August 1917, and it was part of the British offensives north of Ypres, near Passchendaele. The Newfoundland Regiment moved into the area on the night of the 12th to 13th August. They were relieved on the night of the 16th and 17th, and then they returned to the area between 20 and 24th August. So when we started looking into it, we saw that there was 103 casualties for the Newfoundland Regiment. 27 of them were dead, and out of those 27, 16 were missing. 16 is a very small number in the grand scheme of things. If we look at the Battle of Hill 70, which happened in France, roughly at the same time, for Canada, there's 1,300 Canadians that are missing from that battle. So that's my starting point usually. 16 is a very, very small number. So that's why we really pushed to see if we could identify this individual, because we're starting from a very small list and hopefully would be relatively straightforward and simple. Now on the map here, there's a yellow pin all the way down here. That's where the 4 sets of human remains were discovered in correlation with the trench maps for the battle itself. So this is another example, again, of using a Google Earth image and using trench maps and the GPS location of the discovery, which is right here. And then when you add the trench maps, you can see that we have the 88th Battalion here and the 87th Battalion here with clear delineation of lines, as well as the blue line, the green line, and the red line, which are the military objectives. Now, the individual is found behind the 88th Battalion. So that kind of starts giving us an idea of who we're looking at on top of within that list of 16 that are missing. So this case never started off on the right foot. When I started looking into it, I started asking questions of, we have 4 individuals that are all mixed together. How were they discovered? How were they recovered? And as I was asking those questions to a third party, the gentleman who was that third party, who is not an anthropologist or an archaeologist by training, asserted that you will never be able to separate the individuals and you won't even be able to identify them, so don't even try. And he justified that by saying that that's what the archaeologists had told him that there was no way to separate the human remains. The issue is that when I got the Discovery of Remains report from Commonwealth War Graves Commission, we had 4 photos of 4 separate individuals. I had arm bones with leg bones and a skull 4 separate times. So evidently, at some point, somebody divided these human remains that were apparently impossible to separate. And so then when I started asking questions of, well, who did that, right? Who separated the bodies to better understand what their qualifications are and what kind of methods that they use, because it is possible, nobody would answer my questions as to how it was done. And then when I asked to speak to the archaeologist to try to get more understanding of what happened, I was told by that same third party, I don't want you to speak to the archaeologist as it will affect the relationship we built with them. Now, I'm the type of person that I really don't like being told what to do, especially by somebody who's not in my field, making assertions linked to my field of expertise of you will never be able to do this and don't even bother. I'm not okay with that. So in my brain, it essentially went challenge accepted, and let's see what we can make happen. Now, I understand why both the archaeologist and this third-party individual were saying you won't even be able to separate them because admittedly, they were very well mixed. Now, I can't show the photos of the actual human remains themselves, but what I ended up doing, which is a representation here, is I was finally able to get photographs of the archaeological dig, and I finally was able to get an overhead shot of the 4 bodies that were found together. And during that dig, I think they found over 70 bodies or something like that. It was quite an extensive one. And to demonstrate to my chain of command that we can do this, that I can do this, I took the photograph and I started putting all of what I could figure out just based on the photograph in terms of human bone. So we have a femur here, we've got a right tibia over here, we've got 2 fibulas, which are lower leg bones, I've got a cranium over here, I've got some hand bones over here, possibly an upper arm bone, the humerus over here. So by showing and superimposing that on the photograph with all the skeletons, I was able to demonstrate to my chain of command, who admittedly also have no experience in my field, that here's what an expert can say of this supposedly impossible situation, everything mixed together, that even with just a photograph, this is what I can say. And it's a lot, because you can kind of see that many of the lower body bones, leg bones, are all kind of down here. So while yes, they were a little sort of on top of one another and things like that, it does seem that they were put in that grave, what should have been a temporary grave, in some kind of order. Now, but yes, very much so mixed together, which makes it admittedly that much more complicated to try to figure out which individual is which and which bones go with which bones. But with the artifacts, that kind of starts to help us figure out who we could potentially be dealing with here. And we had artifacts from the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, 2 from the Hampshire Regiment, and of course, the Newfoundland Regiment shoulder title. So we knew we were dealing with 3 Brits and a Newfoundlander. And thankfully, my British counterparts are fantastic, fantastic people and do great work. And they were more than happy to sort of step aside and be like, great, go do your investigation. We will step back and we will come in towards the end, because they had already made the decision that the 3 British soldiers, they would not be able to identify them. They have an immense workload. They have over 400,000 that are missing from the First World War alone. Over 400,000. And most of the personnel files for those individuals were damaged during the Blitz in the Second World War. So they don't even have the before-death data that allows them to identify many of the recovered British soldiers. So they were more than happy to let us move forward with an investigation and step in towards the end when needed. So now we're looking at the list of the 16 missing Newfoundland soldiers for that particular area. Now, I will say that the ages that we see here have all been corrected And those with the asterisks lied about their age on their attestation paper. Now, maybe they didn't lie. Maybe they just didn't know their actual date of birth, which happens quite a bit. But the date of birth, or excuse me, the age upon enlistment, rather than the date of birth, was incorrect. Now, some of them was missing a height altogether. This private over here, for whatever reason, there was no height in his personnel file. And we thought to ourselves, since we do have to confirm the dates of birth of every single one of them, and that Newfoundland's a pretty sort of close community, we actually reached out to the rooms and to the archivist there, Greg Walsh. And I swore him to secrecy as to why I was reaching out to him. And then he was absolutely delighted to start helping us and really starting to track down birth certificates or baptism records so we could get a better idea for their dates of birth. So getting the true age of death for these individuals would not have been possible without Greg Walsh at the rooms, and his contribution is very much appreciated. So where do we go in terms of the anthropological analysis to try to divide these human remains into 4 separate individuals? It was a process. So for May 2018, and I want you to keep track of the timeline as best as possible, discovery happened in April 2016. I was notified in September 2017, and now 6 months later, I'm now finally in France being able to analyze the human remains in depth. And I will say that the human remains, when they're recovered from Belgium due to the soil, they were in quite bad preservation. They were not in good condition at all. So it made the analysis process that much more difficult. And one of the ways that we can use to try to segregate the 4 individuals into 4 separate bodies is to use a method that's called osteometric sorting. So it means a lot of measuring bones. I spent a full week, 8 to 9 to 10 hours a day, hunched over, taking measurements of bone after bone after bone, which is what you see here. These are my actual notes from that specific work trip to try to figure that out. And I knew that if I could at least get the measurements recorded, I could do all the statistical analysis work and figure it out from Canada. But what I did do, however, is I brought bone samples back to Canada for DNA testing. So luckily, we had 4 right femurs. We had 4 upper thigh bones, which is great, because then that guarantees us that we are going to have 4 separate DNA profiles. And as you see here, 17, 18, 22, 23, those are simply the numbers that were associated to the 4 individuals to try to individuate them from the other 70 that had been discovered from that recovery period. So what I ended up doing is taking the 4 right femurs back to Canada, and I also took a piece from each of the 4 skulls, because I had hoped to be able to reassociate the skulls with the femur through DNA. Now, we use 2 types of DNA typically. One is called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, which follows the maternal relatives. So the soldier, if he has any sisters, well, him and his sisters and brothers, admittedly, will all have the same mitochondrial DNA because they got that from their mother. But then when we're looking at soldiers and their families, we look to see if he has any sisters, because she is the one who will pass that same type of mitochondrial DNA onto her kids. So sometimes it can be very complicated, especially if the soldier didn't have any sisters. So then that means we have to go to the mother and see, did she have any sisters? So that would be the aunts or the aunts of the soldier. And there in certain cases, we had to go up all the way to the great-grandmother's generation and then work our way back down to see if we could find somebody who was living today with that type of DNA. Mitochondrial DNA survives very, very well in bone. It's been extracted from Neanderthal bones that are 40,000 years old. So it's usually quite common that we will get that type of DNA. YSTR DNA, it's also called Y chromosome short tandem repeat DNA, is passed from father to son only. So in this case, we look if the soldier had any brothers, did he have any sons, and did he have any sons, and so on and so forth, until we find somebody who's still alive today and is not put off by the government of Canada calling you out of the blue and asking you for your spit so that we can use your DNA to compare it against skeletons. It makes for very bizarre phone calls. We fully understand that. So when we started looking for the DNA, I sent the DNA samples in May 2018, and I didn't get results until the middle of August 2018. It takes months for DNA analysis to come through. Usually the shortest time frame is 2 months, but if labs are busy, it can take more than 6 months before you get DNA test results. So the mitochondrial DNA was successfully extracted from 7 out of the 8 samples, which is great, but it was really annoying that we didn't have that 8 out of 8. But we've got DNA from most of them, so hopefully we can make that work. But unfortunately, no YSTR, no paternal DNA survived in any of the bone samples that I brought back to Canada. That's not unexpected, considering the condition that the human remains were in, and the fact that Y chromosome short tandem repeat DNA does not survive as well as the mitochondrial DNA. So that was to be expected. But then we started looking at who has a profile. So skull number 1 was the problem one. There was no DNA that survived in that piece of bone at all. Skull number 2 has a complete profile, which is great. Skull 3 and 4, they have partial profiles. Not ideal, but we can still use it. And then with the femurs, 17, 18, and 22, they all had partial profiles, and femur 23 had a complete profile. So my goal here was to reassociate a skull to a leg and start rebuilding the bodies with that first connection. What was found is that skull 2 goes with femur 23, skull 3 goes with femur 22, skull 4 went with femur 17, and thereby, process of elimination, skull 1 must therefore go with femur 18. So now I'm in the process of, okay, I've got a head that goes with a leg. Now I need to fill out the rest of the body. So we're now in the fall of 2018 after getting the DNA test results, and the point is to reassociate the remains into 4 separate bodies. Osteometric sorting is a great method. However, it only determines what does not go together. So when I do all the statistical analyses, and trust me, it was a lot of math. I think I sat there for 2 weeks straight doing math day in and day out of a variety of different combinations of, do these go together? They could. Or do these go together? No, they definitely do not go together, which those are the results that I was looking for. So when I'm looking at the statistical calculations, I'm looking at bones that go together, bones that form a joint, like a knee or an elbow, and any other bone combination that I could come up with. And in the end, since I don't actually have the human remains with me in Canada, I had to figure out a way as to how I could use the results of all that math to try to recreate the bodies. So we have a reading room at the Directorate of History and Heritage where members of the public are welcome to do some research in our archives, and they view the documents in the reading room. But I took it over for about a good week, and I made, using pieces of paper and different colored highlighters to color code everything. I do love a good color-coded spreadsheet, if I'm being honest, to see if I could reassociate the skulls with the femurs. So I knew the skulls with the femurs, and we've got the color-coded going on for each of the skulls and each of the right femurs. But then using the results, I'm moving around these pieces of paper and putting it okay, does this work with body 18? No, because I've got that bone that doesn't go with it, so I got to move it around. So I stood there for about a good week, essentially kind of playing a weird sort of Tetris, or putting a weird puzzle together where I don't have the image on the outside of the box, and I don't have the borders when I'm doing the puzzle, right? So it's just kind of a big jumbled mess that I'm trying to figure out. My colleagues mocked me and make fun of me for a good week, which, you know, they're fully allowed to do that, because it did look pretty weird, because I would just be standing there for a good couple of hours just staring at the table and trying to figure out if I could make this work. But because I don't have access to the human remains on a regular basis, you do what you got to do. However, I was then able to, June of 2019, so we're a full 3 years after the human remains were discovered at this point, to finally go back overseas and start recreating the bodies and rebuilding them based on the results of the osteometric sorting and the DNA. So body 17, as you can see, there isn't that much. I've seen less, however. I have identified an individual where all I had was the bones from the knees down. So in this case, not ideal, but definitely things we can work with. And I was able to estimate that body 17 was between 25 and 34 years old, and 5'5" to 5'8". For body 18, we had even less than body 17 for this individual, but this individual was estimated to be over 30 years old and between 5'6" to 5'9". Body 22 was estimated to be between 25 and 29 years old, and we have 4'8" to 5'4.5", which is actually quite short. And then we had body 23, very, very, very young individual, between 16 to 18 years old, and between 5'3" to 5'6.5". And I will say that that individual was the easiest to put back together, because when you're that young, your long bones are still sometimes in 3 pieces, and some of them were, so it's quite easy to sort of rebuild that particular individual because he was so young compared to the other 3. So now we're looking at the list of 16, and admittedly, we're down to luck at this point because we're just picking people out of that list of 16 missing at random and starting the genealogy process to see if anybody is still alive who has the mitochondrial DNA that we're looking for. So these are the 5 that we started with. And very quickly, we got a cannot be excluded for 1 individual. Cannot be excluded are the DNA test results that I'm looking for. The word match doesn't actually appear in a DNA test report. But all of the other 5 were excluded. So that immediately tells me, okay, let's look a little bit deeper here into Private John Lambert and see if the rest of the evidence supports what the DNA test results are telling us. And for us to be able to figure out, because the DNA that we use is not the unique DNA that is within each and every one of us, we can actually use that DNA, because if we extract that DNA out of the bone, well, we need something from that deceased individual to compare to the skeleton. And it's not like these soldiers left behind a toothbrush that nobody has contaminated in over 100 years, or a vial of blood in the hopes that their human remains would be identified via DNA, when DNA analysis wasn't even really in existence at that point in 1917. But we use statistical analyses. And these are the DNA test results linked to the cannot be excluded results. So when I'm looking at the West Eurasian group, the DNA profile repeats itself 3 times in a database of 16,000. That's actually quite good. I'm looking for 1, 2, or 3. I've had certain positive DNA test results where the profile repeats itself 150 times in a database of 16,000. That's bad. I don't want to see that. So the fact that we have a 3 here is telling me that these are actually suggesting that there is in fact a link between the DNA donor for John Lambert and the body that came back with the cannot be excluded results. So now we're looking at body 23. Those were the ones that came back with the cannot be excluded results. And body 23 was the very, very young individual, 16 to 18 years old, 5'3" to 5'6.5". And when we compare it to the information that we got from Private John Lambert, he was in fact 17 years old. He enlisted when he was 16, and he was 5'4.5". So in terms of the age and the height ranges, he fits very well in the middle of both of those. So with those results, with the history that we only had 16 that we were missing, I decided that we are going to convene the Casualty Identification Review Board on the 14th of November 2017. My anthropology report is peer-reviewed by an outside anthropologist to make sure that all of the methods that I used were used properly, my conclusions make sense, my document is well referenced, my citations are all in order, and then she makes sure and adds her name to it sort of as a peer review process. At the time, there were 11 participants at the Casualty Identification Review Board. We had both civilian and military personnel from the Directorate of History and Heritage, where I work. We also had individuals from the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team, the forensic dentists. Even though they didn't participate in this particular case, they add another scientific layer to the process. The outside anthropologist participates as well. Our public affairs officer is also there, and she is there from the beginning so that when it comes time to make the public announcements that we've made an identification, she understands the full context right from the beginning. And finally, we had a representative of Commonwealth War Graves Commission. So in the review board, I made the recommendation for the board to vote on that body 23 be buried as Private John Lambert, and it was accepted. So he was killed in action on the 16th of August during the Battle of Langemark. He was born on the 10th of July, 1900 in St. John's here in Newfoundland and was a laborer. I've been told by the family that the story goes is that he walked into the recruitment office, said he was 16 years old. The recruitment officer said, "That's too young, take a walk around the block and come back when you're older." And did just that, walked back in, met with a different individual, and his attestation papers list him as 19 years, 3 months, which, looking at that photograph, I don't know who possibly thought that this kid was 19 years old. And admittedly, when the family kindly shared that photograph with me, it was quite, admittedly, an emotional sort of gut punch to see how young this individual did look. So he did enlist on the 14th of August, 1916, at 16 years old. He left for the UK later that same month in 1916, trained in Scotland, and arrived in France on the 25th of April, 1917, and died about 4 months later. So the final step in the process is the burial. Like I said, they are not repatriated to Canada. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery from where they fell, and they are also buried by members of their own regiment. So in this case, the burial happened on the 30th of June, 2022, at New Irish Farm Cemetery in Belgium. And see here on the photograph, you see members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment carrying in his casket. And in the foreground, you see one of the British soldiers. At this burial, if I remember correctly, 8 individuals were being buried, 1 Newfoundlander, 1 German, and the rest were all British. Everyone but Lambert was buried as an unknown soldier. Lambert is the only one who has his name on his headstone. And he is buried alongside the other 3 British soldiers who were found with him. And due to the condition of the remains and the fact that they're all mixed together, it is impossible to reassociate every small piece of bone to one of the 4 individuals. You had rib pieces that were 1 centimeter long, so that's impossible to do. As such, there was quite a lot of bone material that I was not able to figure out who it went with. So that is one of the reasons is why they're in essentially a collective grave. They're in a group grave, and if you go and visit their grave, the headstones actually touch. So that indicates that those 4 individuals are buried together because we couldn't fully separate them from one another. So these are just a few other photos of the casket being lowered manually into the ground. And then we have wreaths here linked to the Newfoundland Regiment, the people of Canada, Government of Canada, and things like that. So this is the one slide that I kind of really want everybody to take a photograph of, including those of you online. I need you to take a screenshot of this, because how can you help? Many people don't know, one, that the Casualty Identification Program exists. So the more you can talk about what you learned here this evening, the more it would really help me out, and I would really appreciate it. But what we have on our website is this registration form. So if you have a family member who is missing from the First or the Second World War or the conflict in Korea, and they fought for Canada or Newfoundland, please register. And the reason why I'm asking you to do this, and all you need to provide is contact information, just like an email or a phone number. That's all we need, and your name. That's all we really need. But I am going to ask you to complete as much information about your missing relative as you can. So if you have his actual date of birth, if you know his height, where he died, his full name, for example, as much information as you could provide would be really helpful. The reason why we want as many people to register as possible is that when we do our investigative process, our first thing that we look for is, have any families registered for those who are missing for that specific case that we're working on? And then the process to find a DNA donor goes that much faster when we have a point of contact into the family. So that QR code here, if you scan that, will actually take you directly to that registration form. And one of the other reasons why I'm really putting an emphasis that I want everybody to go fill out a registration form if you have missing is that I have now been informed that 4 Newfoundlanders have been found overseas, and they need to be identified. Now, I do not have any information linked to which battle, what location. I don't have any of that yet, so I won't be able to provide any of that type of information, but I have been told that the bodies of 4 Newfoundlanders have been found, and please help us. We really like to identify those individuals, and the more families who register, the easier it's going to be. So if everybody's taken a photo of that or a screenshot, please share it with your friends, share it with your family members, because that would be a very, very huge help to all of us. Now, usually I open it up to questions, but before that, we're going to go into our panel, and I'm going to invite our other panelists to join us. And there will be time for questions at the end, and I'll stick around, so please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. I would be happy to answer them. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It was very, very interesting. Good evening to you, the audience, here in the Recital Hall at the music school tonight on this beautiful, beautiful evening. Good evening to those of you who are more comfortable joining us online, and good evening to our very special guests who are with us this evening. My name is Linda Inkpen, and I am an honorary Lieutenant Colonel in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and I'm obviously the moderator for this evening's panel. The commanding officer of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment is Lieutenant Colonel Kyle Strong, and he cannot be present with us this evening, but we wish him best wishes. We say hello, and we thank him for his work in organizing tonight's events. And I know all my panel know Kyle. Memorial University was founded and named as a memorial to soldiers, nurses, and many others who served and often lost their lives in the Great War. The connection between Memorial University and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment continues today. Our relationship is a true, living, respectful, and impactful relationship. I am proud to be an honorary member of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. I am equally and extremely proud to be a graduate of Memorial University, many times. Again, the biographies of the panel members are to be found by scanning the QR code, and we are Sarah Lockyer, Major Retired Michael Pretty, founder of the Trail of the Caribou Research Group, and Miss Charlene Murphy, a great niece of Private John Lambert, about whom we heard earlier this evening. I want to turn to Charlene first. Charlene, you are the personal face of what Dr. Lockyer told us this evening. You're Private John Lambert's great niece. He was 16 when he enlisted and just turned 17 when he died. Your family kept his memory alive. Can you tell us what it was like when you got that call from the Canadian government to say that there was an investigation ongoing in trying to perhaps successfully identify him? And how did you get the information that he has been found? Take your time, because it's a great story.
Initially, we got a a message from Dr. Lockyer's office wondering if there was a relative of Annie Lambert, Jack's sister, and my mother was, eventually asking would she provide a DNA sample, which she did. And it went on for a couple of years because there were so many processes to go through, like Sarah said earlier, about making sure that this was, done properly. And it got up to the point where it's like, it seems like it's going to be him, but we were too afraid to pin our hopes on that. So when the time came and we actually got the official call that, yes, it's him, we were, I don't even know how to say how we felt. Just excited, sad, grateful. Yeah, it was wild.
And did you go to the cemetery for his burial?
Yes.
Yes, as well.
Yes.
You and family members?
Yes. Well, there were two representatives of the family, the next of kin. My mother was 91, and she didn't want to go. And her brother was 90, and he didn't want to get on a plane and go. So one of their cousins, two cousins, went to represent the family. And two things, when the ceremony and everything was over, they were presented with the NFLD flash, or tag, whatever you call it. Flash?
Shoulder tag.
Shoulder tag. And Phyllis, my cousin Phyllis, came over to me and said, we're going to donate it to the rooms, but first we want to bring it to your mother and Tommy, two niece and nephew. And there's a photograph there somewhere where they brought it to my house and let them hold the NFLD before it went to the rooms, and that meant the world to them. Yeah.
Can we see those pictures, perhaps, that you're referring to? Oh, there they are.
Okay, so that's the Newfoundland Regiment doing the official notification of Private Lambert's death to my mother as the next of kin. And it was very, very moving because, as they said, he's still one of ours, even though he died 100 years ago. And then I think there's another, the next picture is, that's us in Belgium. And the gentleman on the right was the archaeologist who discovered the remains doing the dig, and his colleague. So that's some of the cousins who went over. And I think the next slide, okay, so that's my mother and my uncle, her brother, holding that. And that meant the world to them, because, he's been in our lives always, and to even realize that that was on him when he died, for her to hold that and him to hold it, meant everything to him. And just one more thing. One thing I was really amazed at over in Belgium were the number of the local people who attended the burial and the service. They came out in droves. The people who lived in that area, it was remarkable how many people would show up to this funeral for somebody who died in their town 100 years ago.
Oh, that's really very touching. Now, my sense is that his story may be included in the exhibit on the Royal Newfoundland Regiment that's in the rooms. Did that happen?
Yes,
or
yeah.
It did?
He has his own case with that NFLD shoulder flash and some of the other artifacts and some photographs.
Okay, so when we visit the rooms and
You
the
will see
exhibit,
him.
his story and what you're referring to here is there.
Every time I drop into the rooms, because I'm a member there, I always got to go and say hello.
Thank you very much. Michael, you are the founder and a member of the Trail of the Caribou Research Group. Tell us exactly what that is and why you were involved and how you became involved.
Like yourself, I'm very stubborn, and somebody said I couldn't do it one day, so I did. So thanks for this kind invitation to Memorial University. It's been a 25-year journey for me and different things. So we basically want to make sure that the deeds of Newfoundlanders at home and abroad are not forgotten. And we do that in a multitude of ways. So if you want to change the slide. I don't like being not in control. So that's our mission. For Objective A, we gather stories and items in digital form. A lot of people want to give me stuff, and I say, no, we'll take a picture of it and create a story. And the aim is to eventually have every person who served in Newfoundland to have their story online and their own trail, like where they went, what they did. We've got people from Portugal Cove, for example, that fought in the U.S. Civil War, 2 cousins. One for the south, who's buried in Savannah, Georgia, and one for the north, who's buried here. So there's like all those stories need to be remembered. Next slide, please. And then for B, we have traced or recorded 13,000 Newfoundlanders who served in the First World War. And it's not just soldiers who served in the regiment. There were 6,400 of those. But there's 3,600 that served in the Canadian Army, and the British, and the American, and the South African, and the New Zealand, and the Australian armies. Right? There's a Newfoundlander buried in Gallipoli who was killed during the landings, who fought with the Australian Army. So we have right now recorded over 9,000 of their burial places around the world. You can go to the next slide. And then for C, we conduct group, school, and community engagements. We have educational kits we send around to different schools that are used. We do about 100 presentations a year. And we are now getting into the film business. So on NTV this week, there'll be the Trail of the Caribou production of the Gallipoli caribou. And there's 2 parts to that. Or you can contact me. There's a brochure in the hallway. I can send you the YouTube link. So this is a map of the graves and memorials around the world that we have either visited or located. So Galishaw, for example, is buried in Hawaii. Reverend Nangle is buried in Zimbabwe. The guy in Iraq, that's Corporal Freak of the British military who died in the Mesopotamia campaign in 1918. So we have been to every one of those graves except for the guy in Iraq. We visited each of the graves. We put a stone from home. We read the Act of Remembrance and sang or played the Ode to Newfoundland. So if you want to go to the next slide. I think I'm getting into the next question, sorry. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so this is a close-up of graves and memorials in Europe. And the next slide, please. And you can see the 3 campaigns. The one on the bottom, that's the Somme. The one in the middle is Vimy Ridge, and then you can see Monchy to the right. And then up top is Ypres, Passchendaele, and the last 100 days. So I know what all those different symbols mean, but red is where a Newfoundlander from the Newfoundland Regiment is buried. Yellow is a mix of Newfoundland Regiment and Canadian or British soldiers who were from Newfoundland. And orange is Canadian only. So there's a lot. We went to Poznań, Poland to visit Private Mugford's grave. So that was interesting because it took a while to get there. Next slide. So we have a lot of memorials around the world that list Newfoundlanders. And this is World War I and World War II. And so we got a guy down in Miramar and Singapore and Malta. Next slide. And these are the ones in Britain and in France and Flanders. There are 62 unknown Newfoundlanders on the Vimy Ridge Memorial alone. And I got to say that this is not my research. It's Ian Parsons. It's David Parsons. It's a lot of Parsenses. And my distant cousin Frank, I can't remember his name. Harold Pretty. He has made it his lifelong mission to record the gravesite of every Newfoundlander who served in the Newfoundland Regiment. And I think he's got like 95% of them. So that's pictures, that kind of stuff. And I think one more slide. So here are the cemeteries where it says an unknown soldier of the Newfoundland Regiment in Belgium and France. So these were found by, I believe, Arlene King, if she's in the audience. So in 2006, when I was put in charge of the 90th pilgrimage to France and Flanders, met Arlene, and I said, I just saw this hat badge thing, and it says an Unknown Newfoundland. She goes, oh yeah, here's a list of them. So I went, oh, okay. And then the interweb got better, and the information came up in the Commonwealth War Graves sites, but it's not 100% accurate. Because we are lumped in sometimes as British or Canadian. So it'll say 17 Canadian soldiers, and you go in and go, that's weird. And because if you look, it says there's a Newfoundlander in there, and you go in and you start seeing them, Unknown Newfoundland Regiment Soldier. They're not listed as Newfoundlanders. So we're correcting that. Commonwealth War Graves are a brilliant bunch of people. So every time we find that inaccuracy, we tell them, and they fix it for the next time the plaque was up or something like that. And the next slide. So I was invited today because of this young man, who was Private John Pretty, regiment number 2276, which is also my license plate, my veteran's plate. And he was killed at Monchy on the 14th of April, 1917. And he was really close to where the Unknown Soldier was taken out of, because I've been there. So I always wonder if Uncle John could be the Unknown Soldier, and it's important. So did that answer your question?
Yes. But Michael, I think we need, or I need, a very basic clarification. So you have found remains or burials in 21 countries, 5 continents, but in my mind, I was only thinking about those who died in action in France and Belgium. But that's not, I mean, if you found somebody in Myanmar or in Hawaii, then they obviously did not die in action.
No, sorry. No. So there's a story as to why I do this. So when we finished the dinner at Beaumont Hamel on the 30th of June 2006, the regiment had gone away. I was just going to sleep in Arlene's house because she lived there, because I had to be up early the next morning. I went down to the Caribou, and with a whiskey in my hand and a cigar I think it was like just after midnight, and I called my dad. And my dad was a soldier for a long time, and he was a soldier on parade there in the 60s when Joey Smallwood went there. And I said, well, it's done. We got one more parade to do, and all those men, and in the case of one lady lost their lives, Nurse Bartlett, it's done. He goes, yeah, well, what about all the ones that came home? What about their story? So the motto of Trail of the Caribou Research Group is every story is important. Whether you were the commanding general and died winning 3 Victoria Crosses in the morning, or you're the guy that went over and just did his job and came home and lived with that horror, or guys like Golly Shaw, who ended up sailing around the world after he was a professor at Harvard, I believe, and died in Hawaii in a sailboat. So,
I think that's really important, because it's not intuitive
it's
immediately. It's every person that you're following. Now, you're also beginning work on World War II and Korea.
Yes,
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I've served with the PPCLI, and
we don't know what that is.
Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and then the Newfoundland Regiment. And so World War II is another war, but we need to go back to the War of 1812 eventually. So we started visiting soldiers whom we know of who passed serving the British Army. And we did the Battle of the Scheldt, which is Antwerp. We did that a couple of Novembers ago, or no, 2 years ago. And my friend David with the British Army, his dad was an operator of a landing craft. And when he was landing, the 59th Newfoundland Heavy Regiment was providing covering fire. So we started that, and there's 3 in probably the coolest name ever, Bergen op Zoom Cemetery in Belgium. And then I just did last May a trip through Italy with Princess Patricia's Canadian Infantry Association, and we followed the 166th Field Regiment from Newfoundland. And in the Battle of Sango River, there's 21 of them all buried in a row. And that's where Fish Lake wrote his book called, I Think They Left Us Alone Up Here, yeah.
So there's work ongoing.
Well, this is a project that's never going to end, right? And there's other slides we could show, but I don't want to take up too much time.
I want to ask Sarah a few questions, but we might come back to do that as well. Sarah, again, a personal question. How does a young woman become what you have become? What's your educational background, and why did this work interest you?
I saw it on TV and thought it was cool. Legitimately, that's how it happened. I distinctly remember this very gray, rainy Sunday afternoon when I was 16 years old, growing up in Moncton, New Brunswick, and channel surfing, because that's what you did at the time. You didn't have the TV, well, you had the TV guide, but you didn't have the guide on the TV. And I stumbled on a television show, a true crime television show called Exhibit A, which was a Canadian production. And in that particular episode, a forensic anthropologist came on, who also happened to be a woman, and explained that the body that was found in the backyard of a home buried 2 inches under the soil with concrete poured over and then a gazebo built on top of her was the mother who did not in fact abandon her kids, but was murdered and buried in the backyard by the husband. And at 16, when everybody's kind of thinking of, what kind of careers, and all my friends were thinking of, the more typical teacher, nurse, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I didn't want to be like everybody else. And I thought, that's cool. I want to do that. So then I started telling people that I was going to study anthropology, and none of my friends in Moncton knew what anthropology was. So I did a 4-year undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Science in anthropology. I then went on to do a master's in forensic archaeological science, so really sort of the archaeology for exhumations and things like that. And then I went on to do my PhD in what's called bioarchaeology, which is the same thing as forensic anthropology, but you're looking at it from an archaeological perspective rather than a forensics perspective. Came back to Canada, had a really hard time finding a job. For 2 years, nobody would hire me. I was overqualified for everything and qualified for nothing at the same time. It's a fun place to be in. But was able to get my foot in the door in the Canadian Public Service, doing executive assistant jobs at Justice Canada, at Parks Canada, and then was able to jump on the opportunity for this particular position at National Defence 9 years ago now. And I've been there ever since.
How many Sarah Lockyers are there with the Department of National Defence?
1.
Okay.
It's me.
Thank you. How many in Canada with other hospitals or health authorities or that?
I'm not 100% sure because it is a very popular field, but there are not too many jobs available in the field. Usually what happens is that you'll have a forensic anthropologist who teaches at university, and then when they're required for a police investigation, then the police will call on them at that time. At this point, I've met at least, I would say, 30 to 40 people who have sort of my types of qualifications, but might not necessarily be doing this type of work full-time.
In that area. How many remains have you identified in your 9 years?
Me, that I've been personally responsible for, I believe Lieutenant Hemsley is number 14.
14?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can you talk a little bit about how you went about identifying our unknown soldier?
A bit of an oxymoron, because I can't actually do that. So
how did you know for sure that our unknown soldier that we repatriated was truly unknown?
Right. I can't go too much in depth because I'm not a historian and I didn't do the work. However, I do know for a fact that we sort of, my colleagues, worked backwards. So I have one colleague in particular that her main responsibility is to do the research for the graves with a rank, a regiment that we can hopefully identify. So we used that type of framework and those types of steps, and we started looking at all cemeteries, mostly near Beaumont-Hamel as much as possible, and to try to identify every headstone that said Unknown Newfoundlander. But in some headstones, you have 2 unknown Newfoundlanders. So we had to cross that particular grave out and say, we can't use that one. And so then we started looking into the battle that was associated to each of the cemeteries that had the graves of unknown Newfoundlanders, and started putting the list together of how many could be associated to that grave. And some of them, honestly, it's a handful of soldiers, missing soldiers, who could be associated to one. For the grave that we did end up exhuming, we actually had 6 separate graves that were marked as these.
In the same places or different cemeteries?
3 different cemeteries. And we had 6 in prioritized between 1, 2, and 3. And we went to grave number 1, and we opened up grave number 1, and everything went perfectly in terms of the exhumation, and that's the one that we went with. And we also, those graves were chosen because they have the highest number of soldiers who could be associated to that grave of missing soldiers. So I believe the number is 139.
And how long did this take?
My team, I had 2 historians and the help of 2 university co-op students. They worked on this, only on this, for 6 months. We had a very short turnaround time to figure out which grave are we going to recommend to the Government of Newfoundland and to Veterans Affairs Canada that these should be looked at for exhumation purposes.
As an unknown,
as
a true unknown.
As a true unknown
soldier.
And no attempts made to identify that individual.
One last question.
Sure.
I'm mindful of the time. It wasn't intuitive to me that in one grave you could have people of different countries and nationalities. You mentioned that there was a German soldier. How often does that happen, that you have combatants and allies all buried in the same grave?
It's not every day, but it does happen quite a bit. Just recently, within the last month, I saw on Commonwealth War Graves Commission's social media that they were talking about a burial that the British were conducting, and that his remains were found alongside a German individual, and similarly to the case that I talked about, they couldn't separate the bodies. So they were put in one casket, buried in one grave, and on the headstone, I'm not 100% sure what's on it, but I would assume a British soldier and a German individual. So it does happen relatively frequently. And if you go through those cemeteries, sometimes you will see, one Newfoundland soldier and an unknown soldier, or a soldier from a completely different regiment. So it's not every day, but it does happen, yes.
You mentioned that the British have difficulties because of their documentation being destroyed in the Second World War. But what about other countries? What about Germany? Does it have the same kind of program that we have in Canada?
It's different for Germany. It's I did do some work in Germany. There was a case that I was working on there, and I learned that for inside Germany, I don't know what it exactly stands for, but the initials are VDK, which is essentially German war graves, is very much based on private donations. And the individual that I was speaking with says that he has a very hard time obtaining public support for the reburial of German soldiers from the First and Second World War, and that there is sometimes some animosity from the German public towards their work. Now, the same organization, but outside of Germany, is part of the German government and is funded with public funds, and they're much more out there, and they seem to have much more support. So it's a very different situation.
Different ways.
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left. Michael, you want to close us out, please?
Yeah, can you go to slide 22? So when all this was going on, I was trying to guess which one was going to come from. And the area they chose, there were 3 or 4 battles that happened around there, right? There's Monchy-le-Preux, there's Cambrai, there's La Fosse Farm. There's 2 unknown Newfoundland Regiment soldiers in Vimy. We never fought at Vimy, right? So if you look at this map behind you, It's a map of the Somme after the battle, and each grid square is 250 square meters, and the numbers are written in blue are the numbers of bodies that were found in that 250 meters. So, like there's one grid square that has 829, 749, 207. Those are bodies that were found after, right? And I'm going to read this because it's really important. One of the odd things that soldiers appreciate and makes them fight harder is knowing that you will be looked after and remembered for your service and of those cases of the supreme sacrifice. Sarah's work, along with the Commonwealth War Graves and the care for the repatriations from Afghanistan and taking care of the losses in operations and training casualties, helps morale and the fighting spirit. So thank you.
Thank you. It was very touching. And Charlene, you've put a face on the story tonight, so your presence here this evening is very welcomed. Thank you. And Sarah, you're great. I'm sorry, Michael.
On the 12th of November at the Wessex Society, and it'll be online as well, I'm doing a talk on 25 years of interesting stories and happenings on the Trail of the Caribou. So it's going to be the lighthearted stuff that we did.
Wessex Society, I believe, is at the Marine Institute?
They're looking for a different venue, but if you go on their website, you can register in person, or you can watch it online.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be fun.
Thank you very much. Now, we've got some allotted time for questions or comments from the audience. And there is a wandering soldier from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and Andrea Warman, who was very, very instrumental in tonight, have microphones with them. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please just raise your hand, and there'll be somebody paying attention to you. And we ask you to use the microphones, even though your voice might carry, because we are online and we do have listening device wearers in the audience.
Frank Sullivan, and while we're here tonight, and I haven't heard it mentioned yet, we lost a lot of Newfoundlanders in the Navy. We lost fishermen, and Mon also is in their honor, not just the regiment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Yes. Is there another comment or question from the audience? Yes?
My name's Chris Goss. I had one question for Miss Murphy, another question for Mr. Preddy there. What was your mother's relation to the soldier John Lambert?
She was his niece, so my mother's mother was John Lambert's sister.
Okay.
Yeah. Annie Lambert. She actually was the head of the family. Their own mother had died the year before from tuberculosis before he went away for war. So she was kind of the head of that household. So that was Mom's mother.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Preddy, how many Newfoundlanders served in Gallipoli? And how many Newfoundlanders are buried in Gallipoli?
There was over 1,000 that landed, and they were reinforced by about 100 and some odd later on. And there are 25 Newfoundlanders buried in Gallipoli, 22 from the regiment, 2 from the British Army, and 1 from the Australian Army. But there were a lot of Newfoundlanders who eventually died of wounds suffered in Gallipoli. Actually, the first one, Private Mercer, was the first one at Wandsworth Cemetery, with the Beatrix Potter School looks after. There were 55 Newfoundlanders that died in the Mediterranean theater of operations, including sailors, including merchant marines. So for Frank, we do research on everyone who served, and including the over 100 nurses, the US Navy, British Navy, Canadian Navy, the Merchant Marine. A lot of those memorials, like the Tower Hill Memorial, or Merchant Mariner Memorial. So there were 2 Newfoundlanders that went down on the Lusitania.
Yes,
right?
They need to be mentioned when we're having these.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So if you want more information on Gallipoli, my card's out front, or I can give you one, and I can send you a book a draft of a book that we're in the process of doing.
Any more comments or questions, or something you might have to add to our speakers this evening?
Thank you, Your Honours, ladies and gentlemen, the special guests, Madam President. My name is Gary Brown. I'm a historian, a proud member of the Royal Canadian Legion for over 40 years, and I also bring greetings on behalf of Comrade Berkeley Lawrence, a Newfoundlander who is the Dominion Command President, who is up doing his duties in Ottawa for all of Canada, and he couldn't make it here tonight. But I just want to quickly say, and I've worked closely with Memorial University to congratulate them on what they're doing, and just remind them and all the students and the young people coming, this is not only about a 100-year anniversary. Memorial University was named to honor all our people who served in all the different wars going back to World War I. And from now on, you should never, ever forget that when it says Memorial University, because it is immemorial. And I would like to just say, the gentleman who just got up and had spoken, that I'm so proud to work with him. Frank has over 42 years with the Canadian Navy and the last Chief Petty Officer to finish with the Royal Canadian Navy. And I worked with Berkeley and Frank for over 5 years on the Unknown Soldier. And I'm so proud that Frank was the one that initially put that forward to the Government of Canada to make Padre Nangle's dream come true. So thank you, Frank Sullivan, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, an interesting fact is Scammell was a Royal Naval reservist who died en route to report to duty from Labrador, and he's buried in Coley's Point Cemetery. And it was the work of David Parsons that actually had his grave designated as a Commonwealth War grave. And across the road from there is Moyle Stick's grave, different cemetery, different religion, and next to that cemetery is, I believe, Pike, who was the last Newfoundland Regiment soldier to die.
Michael, I have a question. The Commonwealth War graves, is it only soldiers? Like, what about, and I know there weren't many, but there were nurses, there were other people, other Newfoundlanders that were not soldiers who died. Are they buried in Commonwealth war graves?
100%. The nurse, Bertha Bartlett, she's buried in Wandsworth Cemetery in the Newfoundland plot. There are naval reservists that went down on, I think, the Victor, I'm not sure, Royal Naval Reservists who were buried up in Ireland and in Scotland, Forestry Corps. Anybody who served or died as a result of enemy action. There are some civilians, and I don't know if you can help, that either worked a long term with the Commonwealth War Graves or did some heroic action and are buried in Commonwealth War Graves. There are 26 different types of Commonwealth War Grave headstones. I'm going down a rabbit hole. And each different shape is for a different type of service. And then some people who didn't die in war but wanted to be buried next to their friends have a different cut of the top of the stone. Again, brochures out in the front lobby. If you want any of this stuff, I'll gladly send it to you, free of charge.
Opposite the Newfoundland Hotel, Hotel Newfoundland, there's a grassy area that you park, head into. And there is a memorial there for a nurse, Emily Dickinson, I believe. Who? Ethel, okay, Ethel. And she served in the First World War, came back, nursed at the Fever Hospital for a year. I just read this because it's on the headstone. I didn't know it. And died from the Spanish flu. So what is the Caribou Research Group? What do you have to do with that, if anything?
With Ethel's
Yes,
grave? Right now, nothing.
Nothing.
But I have been asked to be on a committee that will help remember the service of and the importance of women's roles in the development of our province by a kind young lady. We're meeting on Friday, right, ma'am? And the next step is what happened to them when they came home? Where are they buried? And that's the next progression. And to be honest, it just kind of like you got so many balls you can play with, and every now and then a ball falls out because somebody throws you a new ball. And it's on our list. We have a list of nurses and VADs who served. Now we're just going to start to find out what happened to them and their story, because your story doesn't end when you take your uniform off. Your story ends when people forget about you, and our mission is to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you. And did you have a comment, Sarah, about civilians that Michael just referred to?
Not particularly, but I know I have heard reference to some civilians, rare, but some civilians being in Commonwealth Workers Commission cemeteries with one of their headstones. So it is out there. I don't have the details on that.
It's a different shape of headstone, and I think there's one in St. Omer Cemetery, because that rings a bell.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Andrea?
Check one. I have a question for Dr. Lockyer. Terry Roberts is my name. You said something tonight that really intrigued me. You said that 4 Newfoundlanders have been found in Europe.
Yes.
These are 4 Newfoundland Regiment soldiers, are you saying?
Is what I've been told. I don't have a lot of the information as of yet, but when I am informed by Commonwealth Workers Commission, if they say they're Newfoundlanders, it's highly likely because something with the word Newfoundland was found on it.
And do you know from which war?
No, I can only assume it's First World War, but I don't have any other information at this point. I don't have location, I don't have battle, I don't have any of that.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, of course.
Are you going to research those 4 remains to try and identify them?
Once I have the data to get going. Yeah, but right now it has to go through Commonwealth Workers Commission's research process, and then it comes to us, and it just hasn't come to us yet. So we can't really start anything until we know the location of where the human remains were found to start trying to figure out who they could potentially be. But the goal, yes, absolutely. With any of the skeletal human remains that are discovered that are possibly Canadian, the goal is always to identify them. And if we have to bury them as unknowns, it's because we've done everything that is reasonably possible, and we just weren't able to figure it out in the end. But the goal is definitely to identify them, yes.
Sarah, how many files do you have open on your desk right now? Could you remind us again?
Sure. There's 42 skeletons that are waiting to be identified that do not include the 4 that I've just been talking about, because I don't have the official information yet. So that could quickly grow to 46. And then there's the identification of graves cases, which is the purely historical process. There's 43 of those on the go. So we're close to 90 at this point, open.
And there's one of you.
And there's 1 forensic anthropologist, and I have 2 historians that work with me. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Yes?
I wonder, could you explain to us the urgency of your having to go out on site in France, and the control that you've explained on another occasion that you take of a site because of the lack or the possibility of infiltration of people trying to take things from it?
Yes, so looting is a very, very big problem in France or in Belgium, where
even some of our cases, 2 of them in the past, were discovered due to people going through fields with metal detectors and then finding something and then only calling the police a couple weeks later, because they know that using a metal detector in fields and in France and in Belgium is either severely frowned upon or flat out illegal. And Commonwealth War Graves Commission, it's now reached the point where people follow their trucks. So if there's a truck, and they use a very specific truck when they go out on recovery missions because they've received a phone call that a set of human remains has just been discovered, they follow their truck. And it's to the point where my colleagues at Commonwealth War Graves Commission are obligated to take photographs of any cars and their license plates who linger in the area where their truck is parked for too long and send that to the police. Because these individuals will come in if nobody's guarding the site or the site is open, and they will strip the bodies of anything metal, so cap badges, sometimes identification discs, helmets, but they'll leave their human remains behind, but take all of the artifacts and the material with them and then not notify the police. And then they leave nothing on the body that could potentially help us to identify that individual, because the amount of work that it takes when we only know he's from Canada, it's a huge amount of work. But if we know if he's from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, then the list of candidates immediately shrinks. So unfortunately, yes, looting continues to be a very, very big problem for my colleagues overseas. They are committed, however, when they do get a phone call, they respond within a 2-hour window so that they can get to it as quickly as possible, recover everything that needs to be recovered, and then they leave so that if it's construction, then they can continue. But it also reduces the chance of having looting occur in that particular area. But it's a very big problem. Yes.
Thank you. I was very fortunate to be part of the delegation that went to Beaumont Hamel when we repatriated the Unknown. And it was my first visit to Beaumont Hamel. But I recall how beautiful the farmers' fields were and how terribly pastoral the whole area looked. Hard to believe what went on in those fields 118 years ago or something. But I also remember a guide telling us that even today in these farmers' fields, because the soil is rising or eroding, that they were finding more and more bodies. And the number was horrendous, that they were farming their fields, and yet this day they go out and they find there are 20 or 30 more bodies that have come to the surface. It really surprised me.
Commonwealth War Graves Commission, if I remember correctly, responds to about 75 calls a year. And not just like British or Canadian, sometimes they end up being German, but there's about 75 discoveries per year.
Thank you. Michael, the other thing I learned when I was in Beaumont Hamel is that Canadians, British, Newfoundlanders, try very hard to identify their soldiers, and they're buried in individual graves for the most part, not always. But at the time, the Germans were the enemy, and they didn't do that. They buried their soldiers in communal graves. That surprised me.
It's, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, part of that treaty was the German soldiers had to be put in communal graves or collection cemeteries. And Langemark, there's the German cemetery there. And in the middle, I think there's 55,000 in one grave. By Vimy Ridge in Nouveau Saint-Vaast, each cross is 2 or 4. Four. And then along the side, there's 65,000 in a mass burial. And interesting, or when I first went over there, is the Star of David marked the German Jewish soldiers who were killed in the First World War, and they're all together. So there'll be a cross, and then if there's a Jewish person, there'll be a Star of David in the German cemetery.
Did you have a comment on that? No. Yes, there is another. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Again, thank you to Michael, thank you to Charlene, a really big thank you to you, Charlene, and thank you, Sarah. And again, thank you for the audience for coming out on this beautiful night, and thank you to all who are listening online. Thank you for your interest, thank you for your questions, and thank you for your attendance. Lisa? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And you mentioned our student here. I'll call her by name, Olivia Massey. Thank you, Olivia. Olivia is a School of Music student and a reservist, and also plays in the regiment band. So thank you for helping us out. Such a delight to have you all here. Thank you so much. An event like this requires substantial leadership and coordination, and so many university units and communities have come together to plan and organize this event. Some of them are obvious and maybe some of them are less so, but they are all united in delivering an event that serves as a powerful reminder of why Memorial exists as a living memorial. Our 100 years has not just been a celebration, but it's really a reaffirmation of our purpose. So thank you all for coming out this evening. I invite you to continue this journey of remembrance with us. We have 3 ceremonies of remembrance coming up. The first one is tomorrow in this very room at 11 a.m. and again on Friday at the Marine Institute, as well as the Grenfell campus in Corner Brook at 11 a.m. And please feel free to join us. To close our evening, I invite Corporal John Williams to lead us in the singing of the 1st and 4th verses of the Ode to Newfoundland. I do hope that by not singing the 3rd, perhaps the wind has died down. Thanks also to the regiment band for performing in the lobby, as well as to Memorial University's Canadian Armed Forces Student Society, a new society that we have, as well as the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 1 for setting up in the lobby as well. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
When sun rays crown thy pine-clad hills, and summer spreads her hand, when silvern voices tune thy rills, we love thee, smiling land. We